Yeah.
I just want to wax philosophical for a
Please.
second. I do think that, for all humans to find happiness in life, they have to feel like they're progressing. And if folks are not progressing because of challenges they face in the world, there's always an orientation that the system isn't delivering to me the things that it was supposed to deliver, or the system is rigged and corrupt against me. That's been the case for all of human history. It's certainly the case today. And with, you read Thomas Piketty's book, Capital, he speaks so much about wealth disparity in an era of globalization, in an era of technification, in an era when the world is seeing some people have extraordinary gains, but most people not on a relative basis. And that voice speaks to a system that is preventing those folks from finding that path in life that they believe they're due and that they think is obviously something that everyone should be born to be able to pursue.
I think it's beautifully said. It's beautifully said.
It really speaks to the core and the heart of what people term this populism. I hate that term, but it's a lack of progressivism. It's the fact that folks don't feel like they can progress, not just in the US, around the world today, but really the US voice is so strong and so loud on this point. It's why Trump was elected, that the system, whether it's the companies, the people, the institutions, the large federal government agencies are preventing folks, clogging up, giving people, not delivering to the people the things that they said that they would, and not enabling them to progress on their own. And I think that's really, this song encapsulates the emotion of that feeling so well. Can I make a case to you guys? I've kind of been thinking about this, but I'd love your feedback on it. So I feel like there's a trade-off between freedom and equality. And what I mean by that is if you give a market freedom, a market of people doing things freedom, you maximize progress that society achieves. And the United States is the best case study of this in history. In 250 years, we went from a bunch of people living on plantations or living on small farms to the largest economy in the world. And so the more freedom you provide, the more innovation there is, the more entrepreneurship there is, the more of inventing new stuff there is. The problem with progress takes everyone forward, but progress is always asymmetric, meaning some people end up in a greater point further ahead than a lot of other people do. Whereas like a socialist state with less freedom,
Incentives,
you take everyone forward together, but you don't make as much progress. And so if you want to have freedom, you have the most amount of progress, but you have the least amount of equality over time. Even though everyone is further ahead than where they started 200 years ago or 100 years ago or even 10 years ago, everyone's in a better position than, say, they were some period of time ago because we've all got better social security programs and whatnot. There are some people that get so much farther ahead, like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and these people that you can now look to and say, this is unfair. This person's taken so much capital and I've only made a 10% increase in the last 10 years. And so as a result, there in a democracy, there's always this tension between freedom and equality. And those are the two things that cycle in terms of what voters vote for. We're coming into a cycle now where we're going to start to vote down freedom and vote up equality. And this is sort of what the wealth tax, in my mind, represents, is this kind of redistribution or this returning to a kind of the mean or reversion to the mean in terms of like get everyone back on the same page. But as a result, we're going to see much less progress economically. We're going to see much less progress in terms of innovation, and other places that have more freedom and enable more innovation and infrastructure and entrepreneurship are going to be able to kind of leap ahead and have greater progress than us. That's my kind of rant and thesis, but I'd love you guys' I want to reference you guys to the Tim Ferriss interview with Charles Koch from a couple of years ago. In that interview, he gives a really good example, and I'm going to mess this up a bit. But he talks about how certain women that are hairdressers in the inner city, they want to go do this hair braiding thing. But in order to do it, they have to pay thousands of dollars to school to get certified, and then they have to go to the city to get a license in order to be able to do that job. So the economic cost of getting there is insurmountable for them. And there's countless examples like this, where in the US, we've created policies that have attempted to be forms of protection or perhaps be forms of income generation for cities and governments and so on, that in the process, unfortunately, have limited the mobility of people that want to be individual earners and entrepreneurs in the US. I think that is the first thing I would do to address this problem. Give every American the opportunity to be an entrepreneur, to build their own path. There have been three major responses over the past 50 years to this problem. The one, and all of them involve creating budget dollars to fund access to everyone of three major things, which is healthcare, education, and housing. And it sounds good in principle. It is a good thing to say everyone deserves to have access to buying a home. Everyone deserves to have access to an education. Everyone deserves to have access to healthcare. The problem is when the federal government has stepped in to build the programs to provide these solutions, they've created extraordinary incentive problems that have caused asset bubbles and have ultimately caused failure in the underlying system that you're trying to give everyone access to. We have told every American that they should put all of their net worth and more into their house. And as a result, we've had to continue to drive up the price of housing in the US, create a housing bubble by pouring a ton of capital in to keep that asset safe and protected, because it is where most Americans have put their nest egg. We've given everyone access to an education by giving free student loans out, and those student loans have caused an asset bubble in the price of education. And we have tried to provide healthcare to everyone through the federal government that has no accountability, and as a result, the cost of healthcare has ballooned. So point this out, to Chamath's point, there's immediate approximation of people based on which quartile or quintile they're in, rather than an approximation on their transversal of the quartiles or quintiles or whatever.
Well
and
said.
I think what's really true about all four of us is that we all transversed the quintiles. We all moved from there to there, and none of us were wealthy. Just a few years ago, we all made our way in the world and in the United States in a way that we would not have been able to anywhere else on earth. And I do think that that is the most powerful aspect of American liberalism and democracy still. I think this characterization of people based on their wealth is what's so disturbing to me, because you hear it
like
from Elizabeth
politics,
Warren, you hear it from AOC, but it discredits the fact that those people typically were not wealthy a few years ago. That the people that should be celebrated are the ones that went from not wealthy to wealthy through the means of creating things that ended up being useful and productive or whatever the system asked for, and they created value there. And I think that the lack of recognition of entrepreneurship, the ability for immigrants to come to this country and transverse these quintiles,
but that
is one of the challenges. I think we're going through the rolling wake-up process right now, which is people are waking up to the fact that the asset seizure tax is an elimination of private property rights. That fundamentally what you're saying, and I wrote this in my tweet, that private property now becomes public property, because as soon as you give the government the right to collect your post-tax assets through a legislative vote, you are basically saying that you no longer have private property, because at any point in the future, the government can vote to say, I'm going to take your private property, which is different than an income tax, which is when you earn something that you didn't have before, and they take a percentage of your earnings, of your income. The statement now is after you've made your income, it's now your private property, they can come and take it. And so that is a distinction that has never existed in the United States. And I will make the retort right now to property tax, because people always say to me, well, what about property tax? A property tax is a service fee on a particular specific asset. The money that is collected provides services for that asset to make it more valuable. So you get roads, infrastructure, policing, fire care, schools, all the stuff that comes with property tax makes that asset more. And you have the option at any point you want to sell that property and stop paying that property tax. You have the option at any point to downgrade your property and get a cheaper property and pay it lower. And here's the other important point about property tax, it's uniform. Uniform means that everyone pays the same percentage, the same property tax rate in a county. This asset seizure tax that's being proposed is a demographic tax, meaning that the state or the legislature defines a specific group of individuals. In this case, they're saying anyone with a net worth over $1 billion. And then they can go and take assets from only that group. That is non-uniform taxation. It means that for the first time, we're saying based on the demographics of a person, meaning whatever you want to use to define that person, in this case, their wealth, you are going to be treated differently. And that is different than an income tax. Because remember, when you have graduated income tax rates and you say high earners get taxed more, what you're taxing is the earnings, not the individual. You're not looking through to the individual to determine whether or not they're wealthy. All you're doing is looking at the independent earnings amount that's coming in. And so a uniformity clause is supposed to protect people from being demographically discriminated against. And you may roll your hand and be like, oh, who cares about the billionaires eat the rich? That's great. But fundamentally, you're giving the government, the legislature, the ability to, in the future, take any demographic definition they want and go in and take any percentage they want of after-tax property from you. That is why this is so troubling. And we can harp all day long about eat the rich, and obviously this group is biased, but the general population should be very much aware of the fact that as soon as you give a legislature the ability to discriminate a group and take whatever percentage they want.
You've set precedent.
1787, John Quincy Adams
Here it goes.
published a work called A Defense of the Constitutions of Governments of the United States of America. And in that work, he had a comment: the moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. And then in 1791, he made the statement publicly: property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. In an essay series.
Can you unpack it and explain why he said that, do you think?
Fundamental to the foundation of the United States of America was this idea of private property rights. Because if you think about where everyone that came to America was coming from, there were these tyrannical governments, monarchies or whatever, where some overlord or some cabal could decide at any point to take the things that you have. You had no private property rights as an individual. They could come in, they're like, that farm is my farm. You're actually a serf. I'm the Lord. That thing is my thing. You have a right to use it because I vest you that right to use it. I am the all-powerful. I am the tyrannical overseer of these lands. And it was that stasis that drove so many to come to the United States and say, we want a place where individuals, one person, can say, I own something and no one can take it from me. Private property rights are the foundations of liberty in America. Idea that you can then claim acts of violence, that you can then claim circumstances of extraordinary, extravagant wealth, and say to that individual, I now have a right, the government now has a right to take your private property, ultimately leads to this tyrannical form. And it starts out as being anarchic because, and remember, anarchy is a temporary state. It's always in between one state and another. All anarchies end up in tyranny. Groups of people fight each other. They're all stealing shit from each other. Everyone just goes and takes and gets what they want. And eventually people coalesce. They form groups. And those groups become the more powerful groups. And the powerful groups end up winning. And they become the tyranny over the mass. And that is why all anarchies eventually evolve into tyranny. So anarchy and tyranny are one and the same. And fundamentally, what's going on with these socialist principles is that we are taking your private property and you no longer have rights on your private property, whether you are a landlord or whether you are a wealthy person that we've deemed to have too much wealth. We now will have the rights to come in and take your property and control it and take it from you. And it always starts with this framing of moralistic intent. We are good, you are bad for the following reasons. You have committed violence against the people that live in your building. You have taken too much wealth and none of us have wealth. We have a right to go and take your wealth from you. It has always started from this point of view that you are bad. So the first framing is that the private property owner is evil and that the private property owner has committed an act of injustice against those who don't have the private property. And that is the justification for taking away their private property rights. And it is the beginning of this transition towards a tyrannical system, which will ultimately be what I call this kind of great American Politburo or whatever socialist framework gets set up by the cabal of the socialists and what they're trying to put together. So all of these little acts, while seeming ridiculous and insane and inappropriate, in aggregate are the same thing. They're a transition away from private property rights, which is the foundation of the United States of America. That's why I think we should all be so shocked. And to John Quincy Adams' point, we need to vehemently defend those rights. As soon as those rights start to slip away, even in the tiniest way, it is a cascading effect and everything will become tyrannical and it will be very ugly in the United States of America.